Former winner, he knows what it's like to be beaten as well. And certainly all of those riders are sure of one thing: it's going to be a long, tough day. 266 kilometers, 27 sections of this race will be over cobblestones, and 25 teams getting a taste of the cobblestones as they leave Compiègne now, heading out for a first 100 kilometers, Paul, in a headwind and no cobbles.
Certainly, but traditionally over the last few years there's always been an early breakaway. Riders who want to get to that first section of cobblestones with a small advantage over the rest of the main field, and that again was the case today. 21 riders went out front and built up a lead of over 2.5 minutes, but as they started to approach the Forest of Arenberg, their number was whittled down to just 9 men.
And the breakaway starting at Saint-Quentin after 57 kilometers and still looking for some 209 kilometers to go. No great names of note in the front, at least amongst the listed favourites this morning, but of course stranger things have happened when early breakaways have succeeded, even in Paris-Roubaix. By the time the riders got across the first set of cobbles at Troisville, they were leading the main field by just under 2 minutes.
Certainly a great advantage to go into this part of the race with a lead over the main pack, because once you do come to the Forest of Arenberg, it certainly is chaos. That's the way it's going to be this afternoon, because the conditions through there really are atrocious.
Number 86 in the race, that is Thierry Marichal from the Lotto team. And the Cofidis rider here, Francis Moreau, former World Pursuit champion. And deciding it's time to take a drink too. And that is Thierry Gouvenou of the Big Mat Aubervilliers team. Michael Rich of the Seiko team coming through. A very workmanlike group indeed, but the time gains were not great over a peloton which is now bound for Arenberg and shrinking all the time. Already the race has crossed 8 sections of cobbles. We're now approaching Arenberg, which is zone 19, and we'll pick up the action with the lead group. Well, it's been a rough ride for them, Paul, but of those 21 riders now, we've got this group of 9 men who are going to see the Forest of Arenberg first. This is the narrow entry over the level crossing, and from then on there's a huge crowd as always here. The cobbles are bad, and the riders, I think, will prefer to ride down where the crowd are standing, and that is not going to be possible as their Francis Moreau leads them into the forest.
Certainly won't be possible, because this year the organisation have put barriers down the side of the cobblestones for a long section of the Forest of Arenberg. But the 2 riders at the front, riding for the Cofidis squad, trying to steal a march over the rest of the group, but looking very comfortable in there. Tom Steels, the champion of Belgium, floating across these cobblestones at the moment because it really is slippy. You can get a chance there just to see how slow it is through the forest this afternoon.
Well, Michael Rick has made the group. The select group here. Ludo Didriksen is also a member of the group, so is Laurent Debian, who lives in Roubaix, by the way. Thierry Gouvenou, Roquier, Marichal and Max van Heeswijk. That's the front group, and just look at this. They really are having a job picking their way through because they're so breezy today.
It certainly is a very difficult Forest of Arenberg, but it's going to be absolute chaos when the main field comes in, because the main field was around about 50 riders strong just a few moments ago. So when they come in there, everybody is going to be fighting to ride near the front. And I think today the section of Arenberg is going to be a very decisive section.
Well, the last check we had on the main field, there are a few riders in between dropped from this group, but the actual main chase pack with the favourite in is 7.25 minutes back at the moment. So they're going to have to start working once they hit this stretch of road now.
Francis Moreau at the front here, riding very precariously over the cobblestone section. There you can see the barriers that the organisation have put down to try and keep the crowds from actually invading the cobblestones. But what it has done is preventing the riders from nicking behind onto that little path so that they can actually get an easier ride through the forest.
And Laurent Debian, his teammate, trying to keep up with him there, inspired a little bit by the fact he certainly knows all of these roads of this part of northern France. But just look at this now. These riders are picking their own individual route through here. Most of them choosing to ride on the centre of the cobbles, because I think just on the edge there, the grass is so soft, it's not a wise place to be right now.
Not the great crowds that the Forest of Arenberg has attracted over the last few years either, and I'm sure it's because it's Easter Sunday today that many of them have stayed at home and they'll be watching the event on television. Now it's Laurent Debian, the local man on the front here, and Michael Rich, a former world champion, certainly knows how to ride in small groups like this. And Tom Steels, the champion of Belgium, in 3rd place. looking very comfortable now as he picks up a bit of speed.
I don't know if you noticed there, Paul, but the rider dived right behind the crowd there to find his own little trail. There he is. He's in a compromised position right now because I'm not so sure he can get back on the route.
Well, he can only hope that somebody doesn't take a step back, because that would be quite precarious. You can see everybody's looking at the riders on the section of cobblestones here, so he's really taken his life into his own hands going down the back there. Debian still looking very comfortable, and so does Rick. He's very supple over these cobblestones, riding with force, and at this part of the Forest of Arenberg looking a little bit drier than the earlier section. And when the main field comes in there in a couple of minutes' time, it's going to be real chaos, because they hit this section of cobblestones at around about 40 miles an hour.
And the riders picking their way. This is the sign that the riders are approaching the entrance to Arenberg here now, the defunct coal mines of the region. As our helicopters seeking now to pick up the chase groups here. We know that Fred Moncassin and Henk Vogels are chasing together. They're round about 5 minutes behind and a couple of minutes ahead of the field. And there's the field. It's got a little bit bigger, in fact, so there's obviously been a bit of regrouping from the back, and as far as we are aware, all of the stars are still in this front group.
There you can see Johan Museo and the leader of the World Cup, Stefano Zanini, very comfortable in the first 3 positions there. They'll be happy with that. And at the back, if you're so far back at the moment, all you can hope is to try and get through the forest without any problems at all, because certainly this is a very tricky situation to be in.
But at least this group a lot smaller now, and they've got a bit of confidence. They've made the first selection of Paris-Roubaix today, and they've still got men like Museo, Ballerini, and the strong riders all around. Schmill is in here as well. And so I've also caught sight of Stuart O'Grady, and up the road just in front of this group is Moncassin and Henk Vogels.
Somebody's gone down already, Phil, and this is going to be the start of the massacre of the Arenberg Forest, because there are riders all over the place there. Somebody went down. I just saw the back wheel flip over as if he went head over heels, and then all of a sudden nobody else then can actually ride their bikes, and they're going to have to try and get themselves going. But going down there, it looks like O'Grady's very comfortably away without any problems.
Well, the trouble is, once somebody touches the brakes and loses a wheel, then of course there's a ricochet effect, and that bunch now has been totally disjointed there as the riders at the front are trying to break this field up here. They're starting to push on the advantage. The Gam boys are going well, but look further down there, because riders are zooming off into the crowd, and this is the problem. The riders wanted these secure defences put up here because of the way the crowd flocked to reach to see them in the forest, and now it's rather working against them, I feel, because they can't get onto stretches of the road which they might have chosen otherwise. Look at this, Paul. Look, they're actually going to the crowd here now round the back. They're not going to know which way to look here. There's Stefan Barth also in trouble.
Certainly has been chaotic. There's Wilfred Peters in the white jersey for riding for Mapei there, but it looks as if Johan Museo and Stefano Zanini have disappeared. I think they too have gone down in the crashes.
So it looks like the World Cup leader and the former World Cup holder, Museo, both in trouble here in the forest and losing their front positions.
There's Zanini on the right-hand side. They're trying to get going, so he went down, but he's okay and up and riding again. A lot of pressure on the front coming from Fred Moncassin and Henk Vogels. If you get a chance, Henk Vogels is wearing a very bright orange jersey, so a bright orange helmet, I should say, and you get a chance to see him there riding very well.
Well, those two are clear of this field now, as they've so far avoided the trouble. But if you just look at the face of these riders, it's a massive concentration. And it's literally every man for himself. There's Stuart O'Grady in the bottom of our picture as he passes through.
Eddie Seigneur going through there, the champion of France, riding for Gann now, and you can see O'Grady coming through too. Once you get to the latter part of this forest of Arenberg, 2.4 kilometres long, certainly you are able to pick up a little bit of speed. The 4th place rider there in the blue jersey is George Hincapie, so he's got through the forest riding very well. Just behind him, Andrea Taffy, who finished 3rd in this race just a few years ago.
Taffy's got himself a little bit of form, an early leader of the Tour of Langkawi. Now coming and tasting hell at first sight here, as we're now deep into the forest, the field completely split up. That rider who's gone onto the grass there is going to find going a little bit tough now. One or two have seen this gap in the crowd here and have been shooting off behind the crowd, and frankly I don't know where they're going, because the crowd is very, very dense further up. I'm not sure they can rejoin.
In fact, there's a whole bunch of riders there behind the people, Phil. In fact, the race is split into two. It's one section racing on the cobblestones and the other half riding down behind the crowds.
Well, there's Stefan Barth, easily to pick out, the blue top to his French national jersey. He's picked himself back up by one or two riders. I can see a few Dutch riders have made the move. They've gone round the back door. And just watch the amazement of the crowd here now. They're not sure which way to look here, behind them or across of the main road, because the riders are on both sides. We'll get some idea what will happen to these riders as we move towards the exit to the forest. But I just hope they've got a way back onto the course.
Certainly could be a little bit complicated when they get to the end there. It's Gianluca Bortolami riding for Festina coming through. And you can see that the Forest of Arenberg today certainly has been a deciding section of cobblestones. Just on the back of that group there as well, Franco Ballerini.
Well, it does look, in fact, Mario Hertz has just gone through our picture for Lotto. It looks as though we've got this race completely split up now. Remember that the leaders are through and we're waiting to catch up with those. And Laurent Debian is the man on the attack there from that front group. We're watching here a group that's coming through in the region of 6 minutes behind now. This looks like Moncassin and Vogel's exiting. So they've made a very good move now. They're quite a long way clear of the field, which has been torn apart by a number of crashes. Now let's get back up to the front, because this is Laurent Debian.
Debian is on the next section of cobblestones already, this section known as the section of Denain. A very long section too, around about 2 kilometers long. And I'm surprised to see this rider from Cofidis riding out alone, because behind him he has a group of 3 or 4 riders. And behind, still chaos in Arenberg, because Andrea Taffy coming out of it with his very own teammate Wilfred Peters. And I think that accident there was caused by the photographers getting just a little bit too close.
They certainly left them no room to exit with the crowd as well. And Taffy's hit the deck. Peters looked a little bit concerned about him, but I suspect he'll be on his bike pretty quickly. Now, sorry about the rain on the lanes. It is actually starting to rain as well right now, as apart from the water being splashed up by the back wheel here of Laurent Debian, a man who lives in this region of France, so he can't complain about the roads.
He certainly can't. He knows this section of cobblestones very well. He will just go through a small bridge in a couple of moments, which is known as the Bridge Gibus, which is a nickname for Gilbert Duclos-Lassalle, and there'll be a sign across there saluting the former 2-time winner of Paris-Roubaix.
And there it is, the Pont Gibus. I even remember that when it was actually a railway line. That's how many times I've seen Paris-Roubaix. That line is now long since defunct. And Debian picking his way down the corridor here. Now he would like a little bit of help from behind, but let's go back and just have another look, replay here of the problems in the forest. You can see the 2 riders coming up. You can see how the photographers are trying to snatch a shot and then jump out of the way. And right in the distance there, one rider had a terrific fall. His bike was high in the sky. And then that started the ricochet effect in the centre of the peloton as riders came to a halt. And if they didn't fall, well, they certainly were stopped.
They certainly were, and this shows you why it's so important to come into the Forest of Arenberg near the front of the peloton. The 2 riders in first and second place there, both GAN riders. The one with the orange helmet is Henk Vogels, and a little bit further back, that's Fred Moncassin. So today, he's picked his way through the Forest of Arenberg in a very good situation. Stefano Zanini is still there on the right-hand side before his incident, which put him on the ground, but you can see that's the incident that took out the leader of the World Cup.
And now, as from what we can understand from the team car, in fact, Zanini fell on his face here. And indeed, Museo has fallen and apparently has stopped on the roadside. He has a knee injury. That's all we know at the moment. But it looks as though Museo is in big trouble. And this Rabobank rider here, oh, and down he goes. He corrected the first time and overdid it, and down he went again. That chaos is in the Forest of Arenberg as we now go back up to the leader here. I think he's still on zone 18, Laurent Debian.
Well, he only has a small lead, 6 seconds, Phil, over 3 chasing riders who survived the Forest of Arenberg: Michael Rich, Tom Steels and Thierry Gouvenou. Now, I would have thought with over 100 kilometres to go to the finish that this young man would just sit up a little bit and wait for the group to join him, because the biggest chance of survival is keeping a group of riders who can work together.
Well, he's a survivor, don't forget, of the original 21 riders, and he may not yet know exactly who is chasing him, but if it does work out, he's got some strong riders there who might give him a hand.
In fact, those 3 riders who were chasing have joined the leader, Laurent Debian, so 4 men at the head of the race and a long way behind, around about 5 minutes, the rest of the main field. And I would think at the front of that group, after the Forest of Arenberg, there will be a lot of GAN riders to the front of a big split in the main field.
So the order now is Tom Steels, if we look down from the helicopter, Michael Rick, Debian looking over his shoulder, and the other man is Thierry Gouvenou, who's now slipped into third place. He's had instant the game. He's took out Taffy. Peter's almost apologising to his teammate there, but it wasn't his fault. And this is the Rabobank rider. I haven't really got an ID on this man, but he's down, and I hope he's not out.
Certainly Paris-Roubaix today, many of the riders who get to the finish will have a lot of stories to entertain their friends with for the next week, because it really was almost impossible to ride a bike through there. You could just see how difficult it was to control with that Rabobank rider here. But the race has certainly smiled on these 4 leaders at the moment, because they still have an advantage of 5 minutes and 20 seconds over the rest of the field.
And ironically, despite all the slipping and sliding, the sun is trying to break through again now, as we've had about 10 days of pretty consistent rain in this part of France, which has made all of the cobblestones wet. The roads themselves dry out almost immediately, but of course the water stays on the cobbles.
It certainly does, and the fact is that at the moment we also have over this weekend Paris-Roubaix mountain bike event, and the amount of traffic that goes over these roads over these 2 days, I think, does add to the confusion and the chaos and the amount of mud that gets splattered onto the route. Debian here wearing number 123, moved across to the Cofidis team last year after the Castorama team fell apart. He then also rode for Gann, and he got 2 victories last year in the Midi Libre and a stage of the Tour de France in a somewhat controversial finish with Sergei Uchakov.
And Michael Rick here for the Seiko Cannondale team. I was with Michael in South Africa earlier this year, where he helped his team take out the Tour of the Cape, and they got some valuable miles in some glorious weather in there as well. He's a very popular man in South Africa, Michael Rick. He's won the Tour of South Africa as well in the past, the Rapport Tour, and it's a pretty well-known boy throughout South Africa.
Well, there are the 4 leaders now, about to be joined by 4 chasers, and Laurent Debian will see the shape of his teammate Francis Moreau coming up there as well. And in the orange jersey of Rabobank, Max van Heeswijk, a man who's got an excellent sprint, and he too will be looking to make sure he can keep to the front over the cobblestones. Van Heeswijk is a very good bike handler, because he actually came into the sport of road racing from being a former BMX rider, as well as holding a black belt in karate. So you could say this man from Holland is a very versatile performer.
We might need the black belt in karate on these cobbles later today. You can do with breaking a few of those stones.
Udo Dirksen, the Lotto rider there, just putting the pressure on to try and bring this group all back together. So now that they have an 8-man group, they can start to work very well together. They escaped, as you said earlier, after 57 kilometers of racing, leaving them over 200 kilometers left to race to the finish. Now we're coming into the much more crucial part of the course, and they still have about 60 miles to go before they reach the finish.
Absolutely. I've got it pegged at exactly 60 miles, Paul, 98 kilometers. We're heading up towards zone 17. And these 8 leaders have a lead of 5 minutes 25 seconds now on the Sorensen, Vogels, Taffy, Moncassin, Hincapie group.
A very good group that is indeed, but they'll have an awful lot of work to try and pull back these 8 men. It's good to see Tom Steels at the front, a good card for the Mappé squad to play, because they were expecting him to ride well last week in Gent-Wevelgem, and he disappeared once the race went over the big cobble climbs of the Kemmelberg, but now bouncing back, and he's the joker in the pack, because it really takes a lot of pressure off Mappé to have a man like him in the lead group.
It wouldn't surprise me, in fact, if this wasn't a particular plan of Patrick Lefevre, the manager of Mappé, to put Steels in a move like this, because should this breakaway actually succeed, well, Steels is very much a man who could take this race out, and Mappé are covered at the moment. But the news is not good, because coming out of Arenberg, Lefevre has said on race radio that the Arenberg Forest has taken away his 2 top men. Museo is on his way to hospital with an injured knee, and in fact retired to now is the World Cup leader Zanini, who fell on his face, so it's confirmed.
It certainly is. It was one of the most dramatic crossings of the Forest of Arenberg I've seen over recent years, but it is very strange, because certain sections of these cobblestones are quite dry and quite raceable, but there in the forest you do have to remember that that section of road is only open for 2 days of the year. That's for the forest, the mountain bike race that goes through there, Paris-Roubaix, and the amateur event, which happens a little later in the year. So a lot of mud and a lot of grass starts to grow up through those cobblestones, and with a little bit of rain thrown in as well, it does make it quite treacherous.
Over the railroad crossing there, these 8 leaders are still clear. Roquier, Moreau, Dirksen, Van Heeswijk, Gouvenou, Riesch, Steels and Debian.
always amazes me when you watch Paris-Roubaix. Riding it is not quite the same sensation because you're just concentrated on the wheels in front. But when you see the speed that some of these riders actually go around the corners, you have to bear in mind these are cobblestones. They're slightly slippy because of the little bit of rain that's starting to fall down, and these men are riding as if the roads are dry.
And putting their faith in the man in front because they can't possibly see the holes coming straight at them when they're in a line like this.
Just second from the back there was Laurent Debian. He'll be happy to see that his teammate Francis Moreau has come up there, because certainly two riders from Cofidis are very strong riders when it comes to these small breakaway groups. And a man who is really impressing me this afternoon is Michael Rich. He certainly has come along to great professional career with Saiko Cannondale in that early season, sorted down to South Africa. I think put a lot of riders in good stead, and in the future I think we'll see many professional teams heading down there to prepare the early continental season.
Well, I was speaking to Michael yesterday, in fact, before the race, and he said that last year he didn't even get to taste the cobblestones. He was already eliminated because he had a series of punctures on the good roads, and he didn't actually get to race with the leaders through the cobbles. Well, he's made up for that today because he's been out in front since Saint-Quentin. He's seen the group around him and go smaller and smaller and gradually get bigger and bigger again now, because they're up to 8 in front. The time gaps are still confirmed at around 5.5 minutes to the next group on the road, and it looks as though Debian is in a bit of trouble here, and Rocky, Paul.
Certainly is. What you have to try and do when you ride over these cobblestones is stay right on the wheel in front, because although it's a question of having a lot of faith in the man in front, because there's so much wind in this region of France, you do have to bear in mind that you have to slipstream and take a few risks. But you can see Rocky slipping off the back of the wheel in front, and Debian too, not really having the confidence or the guts to stay right on the wheel of the man in front of him.
And so somebody, I think it's Michael Rich, is driving this group along. And now Laurent Debian has been in the thick of the action all day, and a lot of it he's been doing by himself. I think he's paying for the price here. 94 kilometres still to ride, and Debian might well be saying farewell at this point.
He may well be, and I think he's now going to question the sense of his attack just a little earlier when he went through the section of cobblestones just after Arenberg at Denain, when he threw himself to the front of the race all on his own instead of slowing down, saving a little bit of his effort and energy, because he realizes there's 65 miles to go to the finish, so why go out alone? Why not keep the group together? And I think now what's happened is he's actually paid for that effort.
It looks though Max van Heeswijk has got the devil's seat now, sitting at the back of the line. It is Rick who's driving the pace over the road here. Big strong boy, enjoying his contract with Cannondale because they've appreciated the strength here. The man who was a team time trial rider, for which he got himself and I think it was an Olympic gold medal. And now Michael Rick enjoying the life in the hot seat at the front of Paris-Roubaix. But another attack has gone flying off the front. Here's Ludo Dirksen, who's tried to go alone a bit early, I thought.
Certainly is a little bit early. The interesting thing about the Saiko Cannondale team is they're one of the teams that have come together and used a suspension system, but not a suspension fork system, in fact a suspension headset system, and they are hoping that will give them the edge. But interesting to note, Phil, over the last couple of years, that the percentage of riders using the RockShox or suspension fork has really decreased dramatically, and in fact in most recent years most of the winners haven't had any suspension at all.
And Dirksen is proving quite a capture, I think, by Jean-Luc Van der Broek this year. Second in the Belgian Championships last year, and now he's throwing down the gauntlet to make them hopefully regroup. He may just want to get rid of the weaker riders in this escape and try and get the front group a little bit more workmanlike. That may be his plan.
Will be. You can see Tom Steels knows the plan though, because he's right up there in the action, sitting on the wheels of the riders in front, and suffering just a little bit at the back, the Frenchman who rides for Big Matt, Thierry Gouvenou, who's there currently in 6th position on the road. But you can just get a chance to see how fast these riders do go over the cobblestones.
Max van Heeswijk, and there's Francis Moreau. Tom Steels, champion of Belgium, and number 83, Ludo Dirksen, back in the group now, and they're getting themselves more workmanlike. Michael Rick is certainly giving it just about everything here. He hasn't shirked his lead at all today. And Steels thinks that's a short term, but it's enough for me, because they know there's still a long way to go. The best part of 90 kilometres still left, and of course we're only on approaching zone 16 of the cobbles here.
Certainly some of the toughest cobblestones lay a long way up the road. In fact, the effort there put in by Michael Rick over that last section of cobblestones has shed off 2 riders, and the leading group now just down to 6 men. It's good, I think, the Seiko Cannondale team managed to get a man into the breakaway here, because in fact they started with a slightly weakened team with only 6 men coming to the start, and as you mentioned earlier, Salvatore Commesso, the winner of the Giro del Capo, in fact wearing the top number for that squad, wearing 112. He's the team leader today in the absence of men like Mario Cipollini.
And a tough call too, because he's really only enjoying his first full season as a pro. Commesso got his first pro wins in South Africa, and now he's finding himself the team leader in Paris-Roubaix. He's not up in this group. In fact, we haven't seen him all day. We might see him a little later on if anybody gets up here, but there's a general regrouping down there, and it looks as though as we go on to zone 16 that Roquia and Debian have rejoined the leaders.
Well, that can happen, but you don't want to put that to the chance too many times, because once you get dropped on a section of cobblestones, normally the group will ride very well once they get back onto the tarmac roads. But for them, I think in this instance, the fact is that there was only about 6 kilometers distance between the two sections of cobblestones, and they didn't want to keep the pressure on too much, which is why those two riders managed to get onto the back. But once you go out of some of the later sections, there are very long straight roads, and a working group, then you've got absolutely no chance of coming back into the lead.
Well, the lead now is coming down all the time. Frédéric Moncassin's group, which we haven't had a camera on for a while, but I think we also lost a camera in the forest. One of the motorbikes also took a dive, and the sooner he gets back up, we'll show you some chase groups. But the time we have is at 4 minutes 40 seconds at the moment to the Fred Moncassin group, and there's still a lot of time to bridge that, because that's not a big time gap in Paris-Roubaix.
It certainly isn't, and an interesting point is that group is now 13 riders strong, and 4 of that group are made up of GAN riders, because not only was Henk Vogels and Frédéric Moncassin in that group, but also Eros Poli, and getting onto the back of the group as well, Stuart O'Grady. So GAN certainly have played the master card this afternoon, and the big Mappé squad, who looked like the unbeatable favourites this morning, haven't got anybody in that group at all at the moment.
Glimpse there of the rear end of Anthony Roquia from the Polti team. New name in my book. He's actually the only Frenchman on the Italian squad in the race today, so he's showing his colours well.
Certainly, as he was brought onto the Polti squad by Luc Leblanc, who is looking to ride well in races like the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France in what might be his last season. And he always has encouraged Polti to take 1 or 2 riders from his own country on board. It helps, I think, when you're travelling aboard, racing so many times, to have somebody at least who you can talk to in the evenings.
Often the case, and you can't blame the riders wanting a little bit of company in what is a lonely existence in between the bike races for much of the time. Now our cameraman, a little bit of stunt riding here, has got his camera just above the cobbles and zoom right in on the legs of Roquia. But you get some idea of how fast they are going over these cobbles. At this sort of speed, they look rather smooth, don't they? But in fact, there's huge holes appear every now and again, and it really does give the body a jarring.
Certainly does. Confirmation that 4 riders have come into that chasing group behind, which is it was 13 riders, so now it's 17. And in fact, there are 3 Mappé riders in there, not riders I think they would have wanted at the start of the race this morning. Andrea Taffy is there with Bart Lezen and Wilfred Peters, so not the big names like Franco Ballerini we were talking about this morning, Johan Museo, who's disappeared from the event. Ballerini, in fact, also suffered a puncture going through the Arenberg forest, and he's a little way behind the race at the moment.
Well, the Mappé are certainly having their share of bad luck in this race today. The 2 top boys are down, but Ballerini was very scathing in the papers yesterday about his team. He says his form is great, and he just hopes that somebody like Johan Museo will remember the work he did for him in the Tour of Flanders, which Museo won, and he hopes that today Museo will help him win his 2nd Paris-Roubaix, because he feels so good. Well, we haven't got to decide who the leader is now, because both Zanini and Museo are out of this race, and Ballerini will be the undisputed leader, but at the moment, Paul, he's not in a position to do anything about it.
All he can hope for the moment is that he can play catch-up and get into one of those groups and try and pull himself back into the race. Another man who had difficulties going through the forest of Arenberg is André Schmiel, the winner of the event in 1994. He too came down in a crash there, and he's in a group somewhere behind. There's absolute chaos on the roads at the moment. We do know that we have a leading group of 8 riders. Chasing this group at just around about 4.5 minutes are 17 main riders, and then lots of small little groups behind there with some of the great names dotted in amongst them. And hopefully once we get a little bit further down the road and we start to get the communications back again, we'll have an idea and a clearer picture of what is going on. But today Paris-Roubaix is certainly chaos, and we've lost 2 camera bikes at the moment, so we're surviving with 1 motorbike camera bike at the front, 1 helicopter, and just hoping that the whole race and the organisation can pull this thing off.
Well, it's the nature of the course, and that's why it's such a wonderful race. Whatever you might think about it, it is the ultimate challenge to the single-day cyclist. And at the moment, these guys have done the right thing. Francis Moreau riding well at the front for Cofidis here. Laurent Debian, his teammate, is here, but yo-yoing a little bit now at the back of the race. And again, this race is splitting up. The rider in trouble here now. We've gone to the chase group at last, so we've got a camera down the road now, because this is Bert Heemstra, and Heemstra is in a small group of riders here, and they're stuck in no man's land really, because Laurie Oos is here, Marichal, who is in the original breakaway, is here, and so too is Kersipou, who's having a pretty good season, I must say. And look at that, I think Riek has gone with a puncture from the leaders.
That was Michael Riek, definitely. That was the Seiko team car pulling across there to try and give him a spare wheel. But he's very fortunate, because at the moment it doesn't look as if the hammer is down in this leading group of riders here, so he may well have a chance to come back.
Well, I'll tell you what, they need him. I hope he wasn't listening to my little tale about the puncture story he was telling me yesterday, because now he's had another one at a most crucial stage of the race here. About 86 kilometres from the finish, and Michael Riek, a strongman in that breakaway, has gone from the group, and that's a real shame right now.
It certainly is. This is a cobbles at Marchienne, a very long section of cobbles, very hard indeed, and once you come out of this section you have a long straight road which takes you all the way up to Orchy, and if Michael Riek can't catch him by the end of this, he's going to have a serious amount of difficulty to get himself back into the race. Now it looked there as if that was Henk Vogel, so he's starting to pick up 1 or 2 of the riders who were caught in between.
Yeah, because there's Jan Kersipou, number 65. Vogel has got across here. Number 51 is Rolf Sorensen, I think it was 51. And so that is now, this is the chase group, Paul, of 17 men have got themselves together. So we're now looking at the second major group on the road, and the time gap at the moment is around about 4 minutes. That's what they are behind the leaders, which means that Michael Riek is somewhere in between.
Michael Riek must have to do something very special to try and get himself back to the front of this race, but he was riding very strongly before, and if he can do something over that section of cobblestones at Marchienne and integrate the leading group again before he comes out of the cobblestones, then he should be okay. But you know, at the moment the rider's starting to pick up an awful lot of pace, and it's amazing to see that there are 4 riders from GAN in this group, 3 riders from Mapei, and Rolf Sorensen for the moment only seems to have 1 teammate.
Sorensen, an opportunist, and will always take a classic whenever he gets half a chance, is now in a group which is looking very strong here. And again, Vogels has got to grips with the cobblestones of Roubaix and seems to be enjoying the experience once again.
Certainly have a lot of confidence when it comes to riding these cobblestone classics, those 2 riders from Australia, Stuart O'Grady and Henk Vogels, as we now come out of section number 16 and onto the road which will take them up to Orchy. Now this is a very long section of main road, about 5 miles before they get to the next section, which is a very difficult section.
Well, we're looking here at the rear of the group here, which is the chase group, and the rider in trouble is it's Jan Kersipou, so he's been distanced by the 17 riders. Now this is the situation as we understand at the moment, 8 riders, and then this group is now down to about 3 1/4 minutes behind, and then André Schmill's group is going back to almost 6 minutes. This is Thierry Marichal. He was in the original breakaway, so he's steadily going backwards as the riders come up to him, but Schmill, Paul, 5 minutes 45 down in his bunch.
And that's the big problem that André Schmill has with the Lotto squad. He really is isolated when it comes to the big events like this, because the team, although they did have 2 men in that early breakaway, are never around when he needs help in case something goes wrong, and he has to ride the race as if he's riding completely on his own. Starting to wheel his way back into the lead now as well. Gianluca Bortolami in this group of riders trying to integrate that group of 17. So it seems now as if there's being a general regrouping at the back of that group, and so the whole field clawing their way back up to the chase group. Vyacheslav Ekimov was in there riding for the US Postal Service.
Well, they're bouncing over the cobbles of zone 15 now, and we're still waiting to see if Riek can get his way back up to the leaders. Here's Eki.
Strange jersey to see him. It always foxes me a little bit because he's wearing the jersey of the national champion of Russia, a title which he garnered last year, and it's almost the same as the US Postal Service, but you wonder what's the difference with it, and that's why it looks just a little bit different to the US Postal Service jersey that the rest of the team are wearing, because it is in fact the national jersey of Russia.
And the chase group now off the cobbles of zone 16. The leaders are heading up towards zone 15. So the gap is still there, round about 3.5 minutes to the chase group. We've no further news on Michael Rick at the moment. I see they've called in one of the neutral service cars back to this group now, as we watch Thierry Maréchal. He's trying to find his second wind and latch back on now the cobbles are over.
Certainly a very difficult thing to do, especially when you've been in a breakaway for such a long period of time. But he's done his job for the day. He got in that early break and got some publicity for his team. But you can see just how hard this section of main road is. The wind coming from the right-hand side, pushing all these riders down the left-hand gutter, and that has caused a little split in the front. And it looked as if that was Fabrizio Guidi there trying to get himself into the race.
Verhoeven was the rider from Rabobank, but the wind is pushing them right over to the left of the road. But you see, they're not interested in putting home an advantage on a few riders struggling at the back, because they know the next stretch of cobblestones will probably take care of that for them. They're more interested in trying to stay organised and focused here, especially the GAN riders now, as they try to close down on this lead group.
In fact, Phil, I think I just saw Franco Ballerini there, so he's managed to bring himself back into the race here. There's Eros Poli riding for GAN there, and I'm pretty sure I just caught the shadow of Franco Ballerini, so he too now has managed to recover from that puncture a little earlier in the Forest of Arenberg and get himself into a good group.
Well, he's put himself in a very strong position. Looking down at the leaders again, Ricky's back in that group, so our cameras didn't show him coming back, but he is back. As we now go back to the group, which is the second group on the road, and we're going to look for Ballerini in here now. This is Eros Poli, who's pulling through for GAN.
Bart Lazen on the left-hand side of the road, being told by one of his teammates just to knock it off a little bit. There's a long way still to go to the finish, and right behind Eros Poli there, I'm pretty certain, is the shape of Franco Ballerini.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's done a great ride to cross this gap, because at one stage he must have been with the Andre Schmil group, and Andre Schmil and his bunch are still about 1.5 minutes behind that group.
This is the lead group now, 8 riders. Michael Rick has got back up there, and they're going to turn into this very difficult section of Orchy. On the far side of the road there's a very wonderful hotel where you can stop and have a cup of coffee, walk across the pedestrian bridge and see this section of cobblestones, and leading them in there, Michael Rick. So that's a great recovery by him.
So Michael Rick has done well to get back, and seems as though he's got plenty of firepower. Now these cobbles, it's a narrow road this. The cobbles themselves, well, we had a look at them yesterday, they're not too bad.
They're not too bad, but there's a couple of little corners on this section of cobblestones, and you can see, in fact, the pressure that Michael Rick is putting on at the front there has caused this group to split. But somebody's taking over the pressure at the front there, and I would think that is Francis Moreau, judging by the star from the helicopter.
And in fact, this group now containing Moncassin has swelled to 20, which means that 3 riders have come up from somewhere, and one of them must be Franco Ballerini. So that's the answer to that. Ballerini is now definitely in this group as they start to feel their way through zone 15 here. The pressure is staying on, and the gap is coming down, Paul. It's now 2:45.
Well, it's looking a little bit precarious for those 8 leaders, because now the pressure is on in the main field, and certainly with 4 riders from GAN and now 4 riders from Mapei, they're all going to work well together. But you can see these cobblestones are still very slippy. One of the riders from TVM going down there looks a little bit like Hendrik van Dijk. He's up and running again, but you can see, oh, and that was Ekimov has gone down as well.
Ekimov's crashed, and he's picking himself up, I hope, rather quickly, but it's as greasy as you can imagine down there. And this is the problem now, the riders coming from behind, having to stop and wait while riders put themselves back in the saddle.
And the worst thing you can do is touch the brakes, because once you touch the brakes, the bike just goes from underneath you. Well, the section of cobblestones at Orchy has caused a bit of chaos there, and you can see riders picking their way off the front. So that will be an advantage for the leading group of 8 riders, because they managed to get through there safely and soundly, and they'll be organising themselves once again when they get onto the well-tarmacked roads.
Well, Ekimov's had a good Paris-Roubaix in the past, and I think he might try to get himself back into the action here. But there's also the problem, you see, when the cars have to stop because the one car stops to service a rider, and then the riders behind are obviously interfered with. They do their best to stay out of the way of the riders, but it's not always possible on these roads. And here comes the group which I think might contain Schmil.
It could well contain Andre Schmil, who's been in a group a long way behind, but you can see just how difficult it is once you get onto the cobblestone sections, and this now is the leading group, and it looks as if one rider is missing from the group. This is Francis Moreau on the back, right in front of him Michael Rich, Thierry Gouvenou from Big Matt, who is doing the ride of his life this afternoon, and just in front of him Tom Steels, but I can't see Laurent Debian anywhere in this group.
I think Debian has gone backwards at the moment. These riders are now clear of zone 15 and heading towards Auchy, which will put them at around about 72 kilometres to go, which unfortunately in Paris-Roubaix is an awful long way to go, as Ludo Dieriksen sits here nearest the camera. Still looking pretty cool. Tom Steels would fancy his chances in the sprint if he ever got to the line. But I think, you know, Tom isn't overworking in this break. Whether he's got orders that he knows he's being chased down by a lot of his teammates. I wonder indeed, does he know that the top two riders are out of Paris-Roubaix today, Museu and Zanini?
He certainly will know that, because Mappé is one of the squads that use a two-way communication system between the team manager and the team car. But I also wonder if Tom Steels is in a great day this afternoon, because he was supposed to be the protected man when they went into Ghent-Wevelgem last Wednesday. And the problem is, a lot of the Belgian press were saying that Steels was not in good shape. He wasn't riding as well as he should do. He has had 7 victories so far this season, but you know, after a very good early start, it may well be that he's just reaching a point in the season where he needs a break. And in fact, you can see he's bearing the sequels there on his right shin of an accident that he had a little earlier in the week.
Well, very often when you have poor form, the irony is the manager tells you to attack early, because he doesn't intend you to reach the finish line. He just intends you to draw the sting of other riders in the bike race. And so that may be a reason why Steels is in the move today. But the thing is, right now, this is still the leading group in Paris-Roubaix as we move into our last 70 kilometres of the race. And the rain again is beginning to fall, and although the temperatures are reasonably pleasant, the conditions now are not.
Francis Moreau seems pretty happy with them. In fact, another man who's disappeared from this group over those cobblestones in Auchy was Max van Heeswijk, who was starting to look a little bit precarious, taking up the back spot of the group very often when we came to the section of cobblestones, and I think the fire went out of his heart once we started to get just a little bit closer to the finish. These riders have been at the head of the race now for almost 150 kilometres, so obviously one or two pairs of legs starting to get weak. But Ludo Dieriksen, as you said, certainly is quite a revelation this afternoon, riding very strongly for the Lotto squad, and I don't think Andre Schmil will be too happy with the fact that he hasn't got anybody with him when some of the strong riders in the group are right up in front.
Yes, I think they're probably wise. I think they must have waited somewhat for Rick to come back as well, because he's putting an awful lot of weight into this breakaway group here and doing his best to keep it going. Now this is the group of, well, it was 20. You have to count them for yourself right now as the helicopter tightens in on them, but the GAN boys are feeling very confident here. There's an assistance from the Mappé team, 3 Mappé and 1 GAN, trying to keep the pace high. Rolf Sorensen is in this group as well, and he is a crafty old fox, Sorensen. He'll make sure that he doesn't do too much work when he's got strong men around him and the numerous teammates of those teams as well, and then he'll look for a move when he might be able to slip away.
Certainly that's what you have to do in a race like Paris-Roubaix, especially when you have strong teams like Mappé and GAN who are present in big numbers. You have to ride a sensible race, a tactical race, leaving all of the work up to other teams. That's exactly what Sorensen's going to have to do for the rest of this afternoon. But you can see, I think now, a bit of organisation coming into the front of this group, because not only GAN putting the hammer down, but also Mappé starting to feel a little bit more confident, I would think, because Franco Ballerini has recovered and come back into the race, and he certainly will have given them the nod. And he was a very strong man last week when we rode the Tour of Flanders. In fact, he was quite responsible, I feel, for closing down the chase behind Johan Museu there. And this afternoon, now that Museu is out of the race and Zanini a long way further back and thinking about abandoning this afternoon, then the responsibility for the win in Mappé must certainly fall on the shoulders of Franco Ballerini.
And the rain, almost sleet here now, as the weather turns a little bit nasty as we get onto the wide open exposed parts of this course. Compiègne must now seem an awful long way away to these riders, and because of the nature of the route, it twists and turns a little bit before it swings in towards Roubaix itself.
Well, in fact, there's been a recovery at the front again, because Max van Heeswijk, who I condemned for sitting on the back, is on the back again there. making it 8 leaders once again in the front of this race, and a recovery by Laurent Debian. So 8 men at the head of affairs, and it really is quite a strange Paris-Roubaix for the moment, but I do feel certain that this leading group of 8 riders certainly must get caught before the finish, because there's 2 very big teams chasing them.
And there's a lot of passengers now. As you can see here, nobody really wants to rush through. Didrikson is having to go through and continue with the pressure himself once more, because there's 1 or 2 passengers here now who don't really want to get stuck in. There's Laurent Debian, dropped back and had a word with his teammate. He's been on and off like a piece of elastic today, but he's doing very well to stay up with this lead group. He seems to lose ground on the cobbles, and that's probably why he's rushed to the fore here for the next section. And I can't blame him for that. We move on to zone 14 now, which puts us at 69 kilometres to go at Orky. Nasty stretch of cobbles, this one, Paul.
It certainly is. You can see once again the rain starting to come down, and the difficult thing about the cobblestones today is, although we've had an awful lot of heavy rain in the north of France over the last 10 days, putting a lot of mud onto the course, it started to dry out a little bit in places, and then once this small thin film of rain has got onto them, it makes it even worse, I think, than if it was raining consistently.
Yes, because they're drying and then they're getting wet, and the riders don't know whether they're coming or going right now. But this little break of 8, the sole survivors of the 21 that took off a long time ago, and the group of 20 strong, it's still all together, is slowly but surely hauling them in.
The difficult part about this section in Paris-Roubaix as well is once you actually race from Compiègne up to the north, you're zigzagging all over the countryside looking for these sections of cobblestone. So sometimes the wind is coming from the left, sometimes it's coming from the right, and at the moment, looking at the speed of the riders here, I would say they're riding into a block headwind.
Yeah, absolutely right, and that's been the direction of the wind all day today, which is a shame in some ways, because had they picked up a cross or tailwind, then I think we might have seen a very different race.
Again, Debian riding for Cofidis in a white jersey and the blue shorts there, suffering over these cobblestones, not able to match the pace set at the front by the other riders in this group. And again, probably the same 3 riders dropping off the back there. Roquier trying to recover and pulling himself up to the leading group. But every time we come to the cobblestones, Phil, it's always Michael Rich on the front setting the tempo, and it's blowing the group apart.
Well, one's got back, and I think it is Roquier who's just hooked up to the back again, leaving 2 riders off the back as they go through. This is now, as I say, zone 14. The latest time gap is 2 minutes and 25 seconds to Moncassin's group, and we seem to have lost shots of them for the moment again as we get back onto the cobbles behind the camera bike. These are the riders in trouble at the back. Poor old Max van Heeswijk is the rider now, beginning to find this stretch of cobblestones a little bit not to his liking. There's Laurent Debian. We've managed to get round him. You can get a close glimpse of the mud there as the motorbikes accelerate and try and service the breakaway, which is now down once more to 6 riders, because Roquier, I was about to say Roquier's got on, but I think he might be punctured now. Well, that is the law of the jungle, Paul. When you're down, you really don't want to be knocked like this, do you?
Certainly, very bad timing there, having a puncture on that section of cobblestones, because this is a tough section of cobblestones. As you can see, it climbs up a little bit, making it just a little bit harder than the rest of the cobblestones that we've come over so far. Now, the leading group just down to 5 riders. Ludo Dieriksen's decided he's the man who's going to put the pressure on. And Tom Steele's becoming a little bit more attentive when we come to these cobble sections, moving himself up into 2nd and 3rd position, riding cleverly, but never actually hitting the front.
Well, I think that this time those 3 riders are not going to rejoin these boys, because the pressure is again on as they continue now to pull clear. Michael Rich has let a gap go here. He's let Tom Steele's and Dieriksen get a little bit away. He's trying to put it to rights now as he grits his teeth and tries to race across, and the speed of Michael Rich has opened a gap up on the other 2.
Certainly is, but you can see just how close Tom Steele's is riding to the wheel of his compatriot Ludo Dieriksen there. He's right in the slipstream. He's trying not to use too much energy at all, and these are the kind of roads that the riders are starting to face all the way up to the finish line now. There's little bits of cobbles, there's little bits of tarmac, and a lot of holes.
Great big holes, absolutely. Look at this now. They're having to stay right dead centre on this section of the course. But imagine if a big bunch of 20 tries to cross this, then they could find themselves going into those holes. And the thing about the holes when they're full of water is you never know how deep they are.
You never know what's at the bottom of them either.
That's right, yeah.
Well, this is Francis Moreau, a great rider. He's been a professional for many years now. He's ridden for some of the top teams, now riding for his local team, because he too is from the north of France. He's actually a Picard, which is just south of Roubaix. And he rides very comfortably over these cobblestones. A lot of the former track pursuiters seem to have the suppleness required combined with the strength to get over the cobblestones very well indeed, because another man from the north of France, Alain Bondu, rode well over the cobbles in Paris-Roubaix and finished third one year, right behind Sean Kelly.
Just watching Michael Rick come down that right-hand bend, and he almost went into the crowd. He completely lost his nerve making that corner, and he's lost a place as well, because he was making the pace to join the leaders, but one by one they've gone by him. Here he is.
Another man, you see, I think, learning from experience of riding Paris-Roubaix over the last few sections. He's been at the front, he's been putting the hammer down, using an awful lot of energy. The other riders in the group have been sitting back saying, fine, Michael, if that's how strong you are, you just set the pace over these section of cobblestones. But when you do choose to set the pace over the section of cobblestones, you can end up being on the front for 1.5 kilometers. Whereas if you're in the second or third position there, you can just sit in the slipstream and leave it up to the rider who's decided to set the pace. And at the end of the day, that's what's starting to pay for Michael Rick.
So it's Dieriksen, Steels, Thierry Gouvenou. These are the riders now who are trying to continue towards Roubaix as they come off zone number 14. And we're bound now for zone 13. And 3 riders in the lead. There are chasing riders, we are hearing now, trying to get away from the Moncassin group, and we'll find out who they are as soon as we can.
Well, Michael Rick and Francis Moreau trying to pull themselves back up to the head of the race, but behind the group that it was before, around about 20 men, starting to split.
Now this is where it is too, and down below us we'll see if we can ID some riders for you. Fred Moncassin is there, and I think that is Ballerini who's first around the corner at the moment.
In fact, in second position there is Magnus Backstedt.
Backstedt,
the new rider, riding for Gann this year. Third year as professional. He rode for Kolstrop, rode for Polmans. A very good time trialist, and he's been brought this year onto the Gann squad.
Well, the Rabobank rider looks like Leon Van Bon. I'm beginning to wonder if it was Van Bon who did that spectacular fall in the Forest of Arlenberg. Either way, he's up here now. 3 strong riders. Magnus Backstedt from Sweden on the Gann team. And that looks like Fred Moncassin crossing the gap.
That is Frédéric Moncassin. You can see he's not wearing a helmet. One of the French riders who opts for the possibility of not wearing a helmet in 1 or 2 of these races. It is over the last few years a thing that has changed a lot in professional cycling. Riders opting to wear the helmet on much more numerous occasions than they used to in the past. But some riders taking the option when it comes to the big races. Men like Frédéric Moncassin just feel so much more comfortable racing without one.
He's absolutely flying across this gap, but he's obviously chasing down because he's afraid of the fact that Ballerini has gone up there. Van Bon must never be sneezed at. He's a very strong rider, World Championship medalist last year. And Fred is flying over these cobbles at the moment.
Shouting there, waving at his hand, trying to attract the attention of his teammate in the front there, saying, look, hold on, I'm coming across here. We can have 2 Gann riders in the front, and this could be the decisive move. He's almost waving in urgency to try and get across there because he thinks this is the move that's going to count.
Well, they're bridging at the moment to form a group here, and it's 2 minutes 25 is still the gap. As we see again, Fred bridging that gap over the cobbles. Just touching his brakes lightly. His back wheel slid actually around that corner.
He's a fantastic bike handler. Another man who came into the sport after a very good career in BMX. And last year, after the Tour de France, he actually took a couple of days off from road racing and took part in the Tour de France VTT, the mountain bike race across France, and won a stage.
Well, although I said it's Ballerini up there, Paul, I'm beginning to suspect it's Wilfred Peters, his teammate in that, doing a lot of work in this lead group of 3. We can't quite get close enough yet. We know that Van Bon is there, we know that Magnus Backstedt is there, we know that Moncassin is coming across rapidly, and 2 others. We're going to have a group of 6 here very shortly, and it looks as Backstedt's dropping back for him, excuse the pun.
Backstedt has definitely seen that this is Frédéric Moncassin. He saw the wave a little earlier on. He's obviously realised now that he does have a teammate coming across. A great move by the Swede there, sitting up and waiting for his teammate. This man has certainly got a great career in front of him now. 8 or 9 riders have managed to get away from that group.
Well, this is completely split up. What was 20 riders now? A little bit of panic in store here because they've chosen the approach to zone 13 to try and break up these 20 riders. There you have a perfect echelon, giving us the wind direction from the bottom of our picture. And they've got themselves all together, and that is quite a big gap, actually.
It certainly is. You can see 1 or 2 riders trying to get across. They realise the urgency of letting a man like Frédéric Moncassin get away. And once again, they're starting to recover. They're closing that gap down a little bit, and you can see how strong the wind is coming across from the right-hand side of the road.
Well, this is Biagio Conte of the Scrigno team sitting at the back of this little workman-like group. And one or two riders have come up here we wouldn't have expected at this stage of the race, but good luck to him, because this race now is split up really all over northern France here. There's only little groups everywhere now.
Certainly a big Paris-Roubaix this afternoon. Henk Vogel's there just going to the back of the group. He'll be happy because his man Frédéric Moncassin has nipped across there. They have a lot of respect for Moncassin, although he's been consistently a second place finisher over the last couple of years. Maybe today it's going to change around. He's so really believed that he was going to win Paris-Roubaix last year, and once again somebody just came by him on the line.
Well, we're now on to another little nasty stretch of cobblestones here as the riders bounce their way through. This is Ludo Dieriksen. This is the lead group of 3 riders as they go off zone 13.
This is Mont-Saint-Pével. In fact, there's a very nasty section of cobblestones coming up very soon. A section of cobblestones that they haven't used for a few years. They used to, in fact, come the opposite way around. They're going to come along here, past the church, and then take a right-hand turn into this section of cobblestones. And there, again, a lot of mud and a lot of wet roads have made this Paris-Roubaix section almost a classic.
So, Gouvenou is the man doing the work here now. Now, here's Fred Moncassin in the chase group. Rolf Sorensen on the far side. Sorry about the little bit of picture break-up. There is Ballerini, so he is here. Wilfred Peters is here. So this is the group which has now got themselves together. There's Backstead, who went back and picked up for Fred Moncassin. The reason I'm hesitating for, I think it was Van Bon who crashed in the forest because his jersey's filthy.
Absolutely. In fact, one man that you missed as we went through there, in fact, was Andrea Taffy. So 3 riders from Mapei in this group, 2 riders from Gan. This is certainly a big decision this afternoon. And in fact, it's good to see 2 Rabobank riders there, Van Bon, and as well to help him out, Rolf Sorensen, just sitting second from the back there. And I think the Festina rider must be Bruno Boscardin.
In fact, that break has swelled a little bit here, but the Mapei boys seem to have done it all right again, and they could be pulling a race around from what has been a total disaster for them so far. On to zone 13 now. I think there's 8 riders in this chase group now, with Peters, Moncassin, Sorensen, Ballerini, Backstead, Taffy, Van Bon. It's quite a nice little breakaway.
It certainly is. 4 riders from Mapei, 2 riders from Gan, 2 from Rabobank. So a big representation of the 3 major teams in the race this afternoon. And in fact, not a lot of other teams getting very much publicity out of this Paris-Roubaix. In fact, the gap there, Phil, looks as if it's come down quite dramatically on those 3 leaders.
Well, it certainly does from the air. They're telling us it's still over 2 minutes, but we'll find out. There's the split now, and that's the remnants of the 20-man group coming around the corner, so they're hardly out of it. And that's the little right-hand turn now as we go onto zone 12. And this is a particularly bad stretch of cobblestones here. As you can see the way we turned off the road, literally, we've gone down a farm trail now to just take in some extra cobbles.
This really is a tough section of cobblestones, and if I can just recount a little anecdote. I actually fell off in this section of cobblestones a few years ago, and I was so tired I lay on the ground, and I decided I was going to give up Paris-Roubaix there and then. I wasn't going to move. The crowd picked me up, they put me back on my bike, and I thought, well, I'd better get going again, and I didn't. I ended up finishing 15th.
And the motto there, Paul, is you never give up, right?
You cannot give up in a race like Paris-Roubaix. No matter how much bad luck you have to pay attention.
That's Steels. That's Steels, so he can now claim to have fallen on the same stretch of cobblestones as Paul Sherwin, because down has gone Tom Steels. Look at the atrocious cobbles here. They're an inch thick in mud, and that is a shame because Steels was going well. Now he's got to get up and get away quickly. Here's the crash. He simply rode out his back wheel.
But what a move by Dieriksen. He was right behind him, and he managed to flick himself around. There is Tom Steels. What he was trying to do there, I think, was get back onto the top section of the cobblestone there, right along the ridge, and he just lost it completely. And in fact, a very slow change here. He's having the front wheel put in there, and it's taking an awful long time.
Well, it was his back wheel that went first, but obviously he's damaged his front wheel in the impact as the car itching to get by him there, but won't make the go of it. The Mavic team car has stopped, and they finally get him away. Now, as Paul Sherman has said, that was a bad change. He's lost a lot of time. He may well have lost a lot of his impetus. And, you know, the group behind of the riders that they've shed can't be very far back now.
In fact, they're making the corner now into the cobbles of Mont-Saint-Pével. The man there, in fact, in the red jersey, just for directing all of the motorbikes out of the way, is Laurent Bezeau, himself a former Tour de France rider, former professional. He knows exactly how to control these races. Been brought into the organisation of the Tour de France, and what they're doing now is keeping all of the motorbikes out of this section of cobblestones, including the motorbike from the television, because it is such a dangerous section of cobblestones. What the press and the media have to do is they have to leapfrog forward here and rejoin the race about 3 miles up the road.
Well, I think, Paul, they're now no more than a minute behind. There's more trouble there. Oh, my goodness me. I think that was Taffy in all sorts of bother. And somebody's going to taken the detour across the grass. This is the same stretch where Steels went down. It must be so slippery here. And I reckon they're about a minute behind Steels now.
Unbelievable. That was Rolf Sorensen there. Just watch this. In fact, the man in the front is Wilfred Peters there. That is Sorensen losing it, going off the road into the field, round the back of that crowd, recovering so unbelievably and getting himself back into the race. That was remarkable.
You see, you just never know when you're standing in the grandstand in the Paris-Roubaix. Somebody got a good view of Sorensen going through the back door there, but now this group itself, this is now the group behind that Sorensen group, is also spinning up under pressure.
It certainly is. That was a bit of chaos there as we came through that section of the mud there where Tom Steels fell off, and it nearly caused a very nasty end to Paris-Roubaix this afternoon for Rolf Sorensen.
Good bike handler though, Paul, and the wily old Dane took to the grass. Look, he found grass. Right now he'd have found solid mud in the fields here.
Now that has caused an awful lot of devastation at the front of the group. Ballerini got through there with no problems at all. With him, 2 riders from Gann. In second position there is Backstead.
Yeah, Backstead's being something. Look at this now. I mean, you're going to be up to your axles in it on that right-hander.
Unbelievable. In there, Fred Moncassin. And just getting onto the back as well, Wilfred Peters. But this section of cobblestone has split that group completely. There were 20 riders going into it, and now there's 1s and 2s all over the place.
And Sorensen is looking a bit shaky now. He's lost his nerve a little bit when he came around that corner. 1 or 2 riders still trying to bridge from the chase group. But this is completely split up here now. And I think the man causing all of the trouble is Ballerini at the front. And he's just got Backstead and Moncassin now. That's all that's left.
Well, Moncassin's going to be pretty happy with that, because he's got a great sprint. If this can be the form of the breakaway counter-attack going up to the leaders, because we still have 3 men up the road at the